Joint felt wrong in my hands. Stress fractures ran along the mounting surface like spider webs, hairline cracks that would propagate under cyclic loading. The material specifications called for grade 5 titanium with a tensile strength of 130,000 pounds per square inch minimum. This batch was testing at 118,000 pounds per square inch. Vibration analysis showed resonance frequency drift at operational RPMs between 2,800 and 3,200 revolutions per minute. Critical failure zone for helicopter main rotor assemblies. My name is Rex Cooper. I'm 46 years old, and I was holding evidence that would get me fired in about 15 minutes. I rotated my challenge coin between my fingers, checking the metallurgical specifications one more time. 22 years I'd been ensuring aircraft components met mission parameters. 20 years Air Force maintaining everything from F-16 Fighting Falcons to UH-60 Blackhawks. Then 2 years at Richards Aerospace manufacturing certifying helicopter components for military contracts. This rotor joint wouldn't pass my inspection. The stress concentration factor around the bolt holes exceeded acceptable limits by 15%. Wade Phillips had approved it anyway. Captain Lisa Cooper would have understood why I couldn't sign off on substandard hardware. She was conducting night vision training flights at Fort Carson 3 years ago when the tail rotor pitch control assembly failed at 800 feet AGL. The manufacturer's component met minimum industry specifications right up until the servo actuator seized during auto-rotation entry. Accident Investigation Board determined mechanical failure due to inadequate lubrication channels in the servo housing. 1 minute she's running tactical flight maneuvers with her student pilot. Next minute they're both gone because some engineer somewhere decided adequate was actually adequate. The UH-60 had been grounded for 6 months after that crash. 17 similar failures across the fleet before they traced it back to a single supplier cutting tolerances to meet cost targets. The Army spent $40 million retrofitting every aircraft with proper components. But you can't retrofit lives back into existence. The conference room buzzed with pre-mission briefing chatter. Lockheed Martin's procurement team had flown in from Colorado Springs for contract execution. $45 million over 3 years for helicopter rotor assemblies destined for Army aviation units. Biggest military contract in Richards Aerospace's 15-year history. I sat there rotating my challenge coin, knowing what I had to say would crash the whole operation like a bird strike on takeoff. "Cooper, you ready to make history today?" Wade Phillips slapped my shoulder as he passed, his Harvard MBA confidence radiating like heat signature on thermal imaging. Dean Richards had built this company from nothing after Vietnam, starting with a 2-bay hangar at Peterson Air Force Base. Understood mission-critical requirements, respected component reliability. The old man had logged 2,000 flight hours in Hueys over the Mekong Delta. His son Wade was different. Spreadsheet mentality. Thought aerospace manufacturing was just profit margins on a quarterly report. Colonel Rodriguez from Lockheed stood at the conference table, his posture screaming career aviator even in civilian clothes. Contract folders stacked beside him like aircraft maintenance records. Professional officer reminded me of myself 20 years back when I was crew chief on an A-10 squadron at Boardroom. His quality assurance team flanked him, all wearing the same expression I'd seen in pre-flight briefings. All business. These weren't desk personnel shuffling paperwork. They knew what failed components looked like when you're pulling twisted metal from impact craters. "Gentlemen, we're ready to finalize this partnership," Rodriguez said, settling into his position like assuming formation flight lead. Richards Aerospace has consistently delivered mission-capable components for our UH-60 platforms. This expansion represents significant operational growth for both organizations. Our Apache and Chinook fleets require the same reliability standards. Wade beamed, probably already calculating his performance bonus and corner office upgrade. Kid had been pursuing this contract for 8 months, cutting material tolerances wherever he could to boost profit margins from 12% to 18%. That's how we ended up with these defective rotor joints in the first place. He'd sourced titanium from a secondary supplier in Ohio instead of our primary vendor in California, saved $2.30 per unit, compromised tensile strength by 9%. "Before we execute," I said, standing up like requesting permission to speak in a command briefing, "we need to address the titanium specifications on assemblies 4,400 through 4,600. The room went silent. You could hear the fabrication floor operating below us, the rhythmic hammering of pneumatic rivet guns working aluminum sheeting. Wade's expression shifted from pleased to hostile in about 2 seconds, like transitioning from green to red on a threat warning display. Rex, we discussed this during our quality review meeting. The components meet minimum requirements per MIL-STD-810. Minimum isn't the standard we built this company on, I replied, setting the defective joint on the conference table. Metal against wood. That solid click that means business, like chambering a round. This housing shows microfractures along the stress concentration points. Metallurgical analysis indicates failure probability at sustained operational speeds exceeding 2,900 RPM. Rodriguez picked up the joint, ran his fingers along the surface like inspecting battle damage on an aircraft skin. Guy knew his hardware. 20 years of flight operations teaches you to feel imperfections that other people miss. His expression shifted as he detected the irregularities. You can't fool someone who spent 30 years in military aviation, someone who understood that component failure at altitude meant body, bags, and flag-draped coffins. How many units are we discussing? Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd written too many accident reports. Approximately 12,000 units in the initial production run, I replied. All sourced from the same titanium batch, all exhibiting similar stress patterns. Wade stepped forward like advancing on a hostile position. Rex, you're out of line. These components passed our quality assurance review. The metallurgical testing was conducted by certified laboratories. I never signed off on QA for this batch because you bypassed the standard inspection protocol, I said, keeping my voice steady as instrument readings. You're being unreasonably rigid about tolerances that exceed industry standards by 200%. Our competitors are delivering similar components at half the cost. There it was, industry standards. Same phrase the Army's Accident Investigation Board used when they explained why Lisa's crash wasn't the manufacturer's fault. Same phrase the JAG lawyers threw around when we tried to hold someone accountable through the legal system. Industry standards don't mean much when you're standing at Arlington National Cemetery watching them fold a flag into a triangle. The titanium in my hand felt cold, like handling ordnance in a weapons bay. Industry standards killed my wife, I said, voice steady as flight control parameters during instrument approach. Captain Lisa Cooper, Army Aviation, died because some contractor decided adequate engineering was good enough for military applications. I won't put my signature on components that might kill someone else's spouse. Silence settled over the room like radio blackout during electronic warfare exercises. You could hear the fabrication floor operating below us, CNC machines cutting aluminum to specifications that actually mattered, machines running proper tolerances, building hardware that functions under stress. Rodriguez set the joint down on the polished conference table, studying the stress patterns with the attention they deserved. His quality assurance team leaned in, examining the component under the fluorescent lighting. One of them, a woman with Colonel's eagles on her civilian jacket collar, pulled out a magnifying glass and inspected the bolt hole alignment. Colonel Cooper makes valid points about component reliability, Rodriguez said, using my retired rank like we were back in a military briefing room. Lockheed's reputation depends on hardware integrity across all operational environments. We can't afford field failures, especially in safety-critical applications like rotor assemblies. The woman with the magnifying glass looked up. Colonel Rodriguez, these stress concentration factors exceed our acceptable parameters by 12%. The bolt hole edge distance is within specification, but barely. Under dynamic loading conditions typical of combat operations, I'd expect crack propagation within 500 flight hours. Wade's jaw tightened like a control stick locked in turbulence. Rex, you're putting this entire contract at risk over perfectionist standards that aren't cost-effective. We're talking about a $7 million impact to our profit margins. Quality is always cost-effective in operational environments, I replied. Ask the families of the 17 aviators who died in UH-60 crashes before they fixed the servo actuator problem. Not when it prices us out of competitive bidding, Wade shot back. Boeing submitted their proposal at $39 million for the same deliverables. We're already at our ceiling. Wade turned to his father like calling for air support. Dad, we need to execute this contract. Rex is being inflexible about specifications that go beyond what the customer actually requires. Dean Richards looked between his son and me, 22 years of partnership hanging in the balance. I'd trained half the engineers in this building, solved production problems that kept us competitive, maintained the quality standards that earned us our security clearances in the first place. Built this company's reputation one perfect component at a time, working weekends to meet delivery schedules, staying late to troubleshoot manufacturing processes that weren't even my responsibility. In the end, blood runs thicker than mission specifications. Rex, Dean said quietly, like delivering bad news over squadron radio, maybe you should reconsider your position on this matter. My position is that defective components don't leave this facility with Richards Aerospace's certification on them, I said, not while I'm responsible for quality assurance. Then maybe it's time for you to leave this facility, Wade said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never had his decisions questioned in a life-or-death situation. Effective immediately. The words hit like taking ground fire during a close air support mission. Sudden, final, irreversible. Everything changes in 2 seconds. In the silence that followed, I could hear everything. The HVAC system, cycling through its filtration routine, papers rustling like maps being folded after a mission briefing, someone's coffee mug making contact with the table like ordnance hitting a target. Rodriguez stood up, closing his contract folder with the decisive snap of someone who'd made similar decisions in combat zones. Gentlemen, Lockheed requires key personnel continuity for major supply contracts. Colonel Cooper was specifically named in our Quality Assurance Requirements section 3.2.1. We have other qualified engineers, Wade insisted, but his voice had lost some of its command authority, like a pilot trying to sound confident over radio while dealing with multiple system failures. None with Colonel Cooper's 22 years of experience with our aircraft specifications, Rodriguez replied. None with his security clearance level for classified rotor blade configurations. None who understand the operational requirements for combat theater deployments. The colonel with the magnifying glass spoke up. Sir, we've been working with Colonel Cooper for 18 months on the Apache upgrade program. His technical expertise is specifically referenced in our congressional budget justification documents. Rodriguez looked at me directly, like a squadron commander asking for an honest assessment before launching a mission. Rex, what's your professional assessment of product readiness for this contract? I rotated my challenge coin one final time, feeling its weight like holding a piece of aircraft that wouldn't fly. Moment of truth. The room was waiting and I could feel the weight of 22 years pressing down on me like G-forces in a high-performance turn, but I could also feel Lisa's presence reminding me why quality matters, why specifications exist, why we don't compromise on things that keep people alive. Product line requires complete quality review before any units ship to operational units, I said. Current production batch fails reliability standards for combat theater applications. Recommend complete metallurgical analysis and supplier change before resuming manufacturing operations. Rodriguez nodded to his team like acknowledging a mission brief. We'll need to postpone contract execution pending quality resolution and supplier verification. You can't walk away from binding preliminary agreements, Wade protested, his voice rising like engine RPMs under stress. We have contractual obligations, delivery schedules, production timelines already committed. Section 7 of those agreements includes personnel stability clauses, one of Rodriguez's JAG lawyers said, flipping through his copy like reviewing flight manuals before a mission. Key personnel termination triggers automatic contract review periods and renegotiation rights. I'd written that clause myself 3 years ago after Northrop Grumman lost a $200 million contract when their lead propulsion engineer transferred to Boeing mid-project, standard protection for mission-critical staff. Learned it the hard way from watching a competitor's program crash and burn when they couldn't maintain technical continuity. Now it was the kill switch that would shut down Wade's big moment, like pulling the ejection handle on a burning aircraft. Rodriguez extended his hand to me like a departing squadron commander. Rex, when you land somewhere new, contact me. Engineers with your integrity and operational experience are getting harder to find in this business. Appreciate that, Colonel Rodriguez. You have my direct line. With that, the Lockheed team packed up and departed like a tactical withdrawal. Professional, efficient, final. Silence filled the conference room like the quiet after artillery stops firing. You could cut the tension with a survival knife. Pack your things, Wade said, not looking at me, studying his smartphone like checking navigation displays. Security will escort you out. I nodded once, picked up my toolbox from under the conference table and headed for the exit. 22 years of building something reliable gone in 15 minutes. But as those doors closed, part of me felt lighter somehow, like dropping external fuel tanks before engaging in air-to-air combat. No more fighting battles over every single quality standard. No more watching profit margins override safety specifications that kept aircrew breathing. The fabrication floor buzzed as I walked through it one final time. Troy Bennett looked up from his 5-axis machining center, confusion written across his face like a pilot getting contradictory instructions from tower control. Word travels fast in a facility this size, especially when colonels start walking out with their toolboxes. "Colonel Cooper, what's the situation?" Troy asked, using my retired rank like half the former military guys in the shop. "Change of management philosophy, Troy. Keep building them right, no matter what the new directives say." He nodded, understanding more than he probably should have. Good machinist. Troy, former Air Force crew chief I'd recommended for hire 6 years ago when he separated from service. Kid knew the difference between mission-ready and good enough from working flight lines at Ramstein and Kadena. At home, I poured 3 fingers of Maker's Mark and sat on my back deck for the first time in months. Actually watched the sun set over the Rockies instead of just hearing about Colorado sunsets from other people. The mountains looked different when you had time to appreciate them, like seeing terrain from 30,000 feet instead of staying focused on instrument panels. My phone started buzzing around 1800 hours with market alerts. Richards Aerospace stock down 16% on rumors about the Lockheed contract collapse. Then the calls started. Colleagues wanting the inside story, like intelligence officers requesting situation reports, defense industry reporters sniffing around for drama, executive recruiters trying to place me somewhere else before my security clearance expired. I let them all go to voicemail. Wasn't ready to conduct interviews yet. Instead, I worked in my garage. Had a P-51 Mustang I'd bought 3 years ago right after Lisa's funeral. A project that needed someone who understood precision engineering. Never had time to touch it properly, but now time was all I had. Started with the Merlin engine block, checking every measurement twice, cleaning every surface until it met wartime production standards. No shortcuts, no adequate tolerances. The way aircraft should be built when lives depend on them. The Mustang had been built in 1944 by North American Aviation, back when American manufacturing meant something. Back when engineers understood that pilot survival depended on every rivet being installed correctly, every weld meeting specifications, every component tested to destruction limits before installation. "You sound different," my brother Scott said when I finally returned his call a week later. Scott had done 12 years Navy, understood military, culture, and the transition to civilian life. Different how? Relaxed. "I haven't heard you this calm since before Lisa died. Getting fired might be the best thing that happened to you." "Maybe," I admitted, running my hand along the Mustang's freshly rebuilt carburetor assembly. "But 22 years, Scott. Built that place from a 2-bay operation into a legitimate defense contractor. And they let some MBA kid throw it all away because I wouldn't compromise on specifications that keep aircrew alive." "What did they really build for you, though?" he asked. "You gave them everything. Weekends, leave time, holidays. First time that kid wanted to flex his authority, they chose him over you." Scott wasn't wrong. I'd worked through Christmas shutdowns, missed family gatherings, stayed late to fix production problems that weren't even my responsibility. And when push came to shove, 22 years of loyalty bought me exactly nothing. The Colorado Springs Gazette ran a story about the Lockheed contract falling through. Didn't mention my name, but anyone in the defense industry could read between the lines. Richards Aerospace stock kept sliding like an aircraft in an unrecoverable stall. 2 other major clients started requesting detailed quality audits and personnel reviews. 2 weeks after my termination, Dean finally managed to get through to me on my secure line. "Rex, we need to talk. The board wants you back. This situation has degraded beyond our projections." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Man sounded like he'd been running combat missions for 30 days straight without adequate crew rest. "Lockheed won't return to negotiations without quality guarantees that only you can provide. We've had 3 other prime contractors request comprehensive audits of our manufacturing processes. Wade's been reassigned to business development away from operational oversight. What are the terms for reinstatement? Name them." That got my attention. Dean Richards didn't negotiate from positions of weakness, not even for family members. The situation must be worse than their stock price indicated. "I'll consider it," I said, and terminated the call. That night, I couldn't achieve proper crew rest. What did I actually want? My position back, public vindication, strategic revenge, all of the above, honestly. But there was something else forming in the back of my mind, like a mission plan developing during pre-flight planning. An idea that had been taking shape while I worked on the Mustang's precision components. The tolerances required for proper warbird restoration weren't that different from what I'd been doing for Richards Aerospace for 22 years. Same attention to detail, same zero-defect approach to manufacturing, but without corporate bureaucracy interfering with operational requirements. By morning, I had a complete tactical plan, not just for returning to Richards Aerospace, but for something bigger. Something that would prove quality craftsmanship still had strategic value in a defense industry obsessed with cutting corners to win contracts. I called Dean back at 0700 hours. I'll meet with the board tomorrow. Not next week, not when it fits their schedule. Tomorrow at 1400 hours. And I'm bringing non-negotiable terms of engagement. 4 hours later, I walked into the Richards Aerospace boardroom wearing the same flight suit I'd been terminated in. Nomex fabric, steel-toed boots, the uniform that said I belonged on production floors, not in executive conference rooms. The message wasn't subtle, but subtlety hadn't protected my career the first time around. The board members stood when I entered like junior officers acknowledging a senior commander. Mix of desperation and guilt written all over their faces like pilots who'd bent aircraft through poor decision-making. Wade was conspicuously absent, which told me everything I needed to know about how badly their situation had deteriorated. "Thank you for coming, Rex," the chairman said, gesturing to an empty seat like offering a co-pilot position. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss reinstatement." "Let's skip the diplomatic protocol," I replied, maintaining standing position. "Since my departure, your stock has dropped 16%. 3 major prime contractors have initiated quality reviews. Lockheed's contract is terminated. Your situation requires my technical expertise." Uncomfortable shifting around the table. Some cleared their throats like pilots dealing with radio interference. Others studied their paperwork like navigation charts that might contain escape routes. "We made a critical tactical error," the chairman admitted. "What would constitute acceptable terms for your return?" I opened my briefcase and withdrew a folder like presenting classified mission parameters. 22 years of defense industry experience had taught me to come prepared for moments like this. These terms are non-negotiable. I placed the document in front of him, watching as he opened it and his eyebrows shot up toward his hairline like afterburner engagement. He passed the folder to Dean, whose face went white as aircraft aluminum as he read through my operational requirements. The room achieved tactical silence. "This compensation package is extensive," Dean said finally, like acknowledging the cost of a major aircraft modification program. "Affirmative. Triple my previous salary, board membership with voting authority, complete operational control over manufacturing processes, and quality assurance protocols. Also, this intellectual property development clause. Any new aerospace technology I develop while employed here remains 70% my personal property. Company retains 30% ownership, but I maintain controlling interest and licensing rights. That's highly irregular for defense contractors," one board member objected, like questioning flight parameters. "So is terminating your most senior quality engineer over safety protocols on the day of a $45 million contract execution," I replied. "Consider it insurance against future management failures." They exchanged looks, that silent communication that happens when aircrew realize they're in an unrecoverable situation with limited options. Finally, the chairman pushed the contract back to me, his signature fresh on the page like signing aircraft acceptance documents. Approved for immediate implementation. One by one, the other board members signed like acknowledging mission orders. Dean was last, his pen hovering for a moment before he added his name. Guy looked like he'd aged 5 years during a 2-week deployment. "When do you resume operational status?" the chairman asked. "Mission restart begins immediately," I said, securing the signed contract in my briefcase. "I'll be in my office in 20 minutes, initiating recovery protocols." That evening, I called Rodriguez at Lockheed. The conversation lasted 2 hours, exactly what I'd expected for contract renegotiation. He was reluctant to re-engage after the previous diplomatic failure. "Your company showed its true operational priorities, Rex. Why would I trust their mission commitment again?" "You wouldn't be trusting their management," I replied, settling into my chair with fresh coffee like beginning a long-duration mission brief. "You'd be trusting me personally, and I now have executive authority to guarantee what I promise operationally." Rodriguez had integrity, but he also had congressional oversight and quarterly performance reports to worry about. In the end, he agreed to consider a revised proposal with significantly modified terms for Richards Aerospace, but enhanced quality guarantees compared to the original contract. The new deal would be worth $38 million over 4 years instead of the original $45 million. 15% reduction for the company, but it represented something built on proper engineering foundations. Over the following weeks, I worked systematically to repair what could be salvaged from the operational disaster. The rotor joint production line required complete overhaul, like rebuilding an engine after catastrophic failure. I scrapped the entire batch of 12,000 defective units, absorbed the financial cost, and restarted manufacturing with proper materials and verified tolerances. Several departments needed organizational restructuring. Some positions were eliminated, mostly middle management personnel who'd been more focused on pleasing Wade than maintaining engineering standards. But an idea had been processing in my tactical planning since my first day back. That unusual intellectual property clause in my contract hadn't been inserted randomly. I had a bigger strategic objective, one that would require patience and systematic development. The plan started with recruiting Rachel Turner, our head of product development. Rachel was mission capable, one of the few engineers who'd worked her way up from fabrication floors instead of arriving straight from universities with theoretical knowledge and no practical experience. "I need a classified project," I told her over coffee in the break room one morning. "Something small, developmental. Can your team provide technical support?" Rachel looked interested but appropriately cautious. "What kind of project parameters?" "I've been analyzing precision manufacturing requirements, specifically custom aerospace components for military restoration markets, air racing applications, hardware that requires tolerances beyond what mass production facilities can justify economically." Within days, Rachel had assembled a specialized team of our most capable personnel. We worked evenings and weekends like conducting classified research, developing prototypes that pushed manufacturing precision beyond anything Richards Aerospace had ever attempted. 6 months later, Cooper Aerospace Precision was born. The launch exceeded every projection we'd made. Press coverage focused on our precision capabilities, but also highlighted the story behind our founding, "Fired for Ethics." How one engineer turned termination into innovation, read one Aerospace Weekly headline. Orders came in faster than we could handle them. Racing teams, military restoration shops, custom aircraft builders. They wanted components built right, not just built cheap. We had to establish waiting lists within the first month. Cooper Aerospace Precision was pulling in $2.3 million in orders before we'd even delivered our first production batch. By month 3, we were operating at 140% capacity, working overtime to meet demand for precision components that other manufacturers wouldn't even bid on. 2 weeks after launch, Rodriguez gave an interview to Defense Industry Daily mentioning Cooper Aerospace. "Best components I've seen in 30 years, he told the reporter. "I appreciate supporting a company that puts integrity first." The interview went viral in aerospace circles. Orders tripled overnight. We had to turn away business. 3 months after launch, Cooper Aerospace had become more than successful. We'd become the standard that other precision manufacturers measured themselves against. Revenue was approaching 35% of Richards Aerospace's annual income, and we were just getting started. On the 1-year anniversary of my termination, Wade approached me for the first time since that day. The arrogance that had defined him a year ago had been systematically ground away by 12 months of watching consequences compound into public failure. His father's company had stabilized, but barely. The defense industry had long memories, and Richards Aerospace was still rebuilding trust. "The way you built this," he said quietly, gesturing toward our production floor where machinists were crafting components to tolerances most shops considered impossible. "It's impressive." "Quality work tends to be," I replied, not looking up from the turbine blade specifications I was reviewing. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I've been thinking about what you said about building things instead of just managing numbers. Would you consider teaching me?" "Not as a favor, just as professional development opportunity." I studied him. The kid who'd terminated me for refusing to compromise had spent a year learning what compromise actually cost. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from watching your own mistakes play out in real time. "Applications for our technical apprenticeship program open next month," I said, handing him my business card. "It's demanding work. No shortcuts, no special treatment based on family connections." "I understand," he said. "I need to learn how to build things that last." 6 months later, Wade earned his way into the apprenticeship program, not because of his last name, but because his application demonstrated genuine understanding of what he'd done wrong and what he needed to learn. Cooper Aerospace continued growing. What began as response to workplace injustice evolved into proof that excellence and profitability could coexist when you serve the right market the right way. The revenge, if you want to call it that, wasn't in Wade's demotion or Richards Aerospace's struggles. It was in transforming a moment designed to diminish me into a movement that elevated manufacturing standards across the industry. Sometimes the most devastating response to someone trying to delete you from the system is building a better system entirely. Real power isn't in destroying the people who wronged you. It's in building something so solid they have no choice but to respect what you've created.